What's up guys, Dzeeff here. After 10,000 years, I've decided to finally post another deck profile from a YCS. It's true, I still do play Paper Yu-Gi-Oh! Quite a bit. I travel to most of the YCSs in North America, but I don't always post the deck profiles anymore because I just felt like they weren't that crazy, you know, I wasn't topping or whatever, but I did play Exosisters at both YCS Indy 3 weeks ago and at YCS Richmond 1 week ago, and I got a feature match at Richmond, which was a lot of fun, so I thought I would profile it for you guys today. In regards to that feature match, I made a pretty big blunder in game 2. I didn't realize I had drawn all my Ellises. I tried to use a Vadis, it didn't resolve, it was really embarrassing, and I think it just goes to show that even when you draw a bad hand, you should really make sure that you're going through the lines and thinking about your plays, because I easily could have searched Exosister packs right there and then chained that and put a monster on the board, which would have been pretty good. I had a ton of fun in Richmond. It was a lot of fun starting 4-0. It's too bad the rest of the day didn't go as well, but I wanted to show you guys my deck profile today because I've never talked about Exosisters extensively on this channel despite taking them to like 5 or 6 YCSs. I love this deck. It is one of my all-time favorite strategies, and I really did spend some time on this deck list, and I'm pretty happy with it. I did manage to win a side event at Indy and a side event at Richmond. Not that that really matters compared to the main event, but I do think it goes to show that the deck can get some wins. You just sometimes have to settle in and make sure you're making the right plays. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about Exosisters. Now, I'm not sure when the next profile of this deck will be, so I'm probably going to try to say as many thoughts as possible in this video, so bear with me here. But for my Exosister lineup, I was running 3 copies of Martha, 3 copies of Ellis, 1 copy of Stella, and 1 copy of Sophia. So this is a pretty low monster count, and you can see why the Vadis couldn't resolve. All 3 Ellises were on the deck, and Ellis is the only Vadis target. You have to summon either Ellis and Stella or Ellis and Martha with this build. I'm fine with that. You just have to make sure you're paying attention to your resources. Irene was a terrible card to draw ever, so I just don't want to see it. As long as you're paying attention, unlike me in the feature match, 8 Exosisters should be enough in the current format. At least that's what I think. I really like this lineup. I don't know if Sophia is completely necessary, but I did miss it at Indy when I didn't play it. If you don't open Prosperity, it's great to get the extra draw, but if you do open Prosperity, it's basically a vanilla monster. But I did decide to play it, so it is what it is. I thought it was pretty good though. And this might be a little bit controversial, but I have always loved 3 and 3. I know that 2 and 2 is like the ratio that almost everyone uses, or maybe 3 Aratama, 2 Sakitama. The thing is, especially because I don't play as many Exosister names, I want to draw these cards, and I want to draw Aratama and Sakitama together because, to be completely honest, if you normal summon Aratama and your opponent hits you with a hand trap and you don't have exactly Sakitama in hand, your turn basically ends a lot of the time, and that really sucks. So I really didn't mind having 3 and 3. This is the best extender in the entire deck, and I don't mind drawing it. Even drawing like 2 of these is fine. You can just normal and then do full combo. It's important to note that any 2 monsters in this deck is full combo, so you just need to draw any 2 of your level 4 monsters and then you're good. Aratama by itself is a 1 card, but a lot of times you do need 2, and of course if your opponent has hand traps, you're going to need 2 cards anyway. But I liked the extra copies of Sakitama just so that I felt even safer against hand traps. Speaking of hand traps, we did play 3 copies of Ash Blossom and main 3 copies of Shifter. I don't really see Exosisters as a Shifter deck in the same category as Fluanderees and stuff like that. This card is actually pretty bad when you go first. It really shuts off a lot of your cards. It makes it so you can't Vadis, it makes it so you can't Dweller and stuff like that. For example, think about against like Unchained. Their cards still trigger when they're destroyed and banished, but if you don't have Shifter and then you just Dweller them, they don't get any of their trigger effects. So in a lot of matchups, you side out Shifter going first because this deck really does want your opponent to interact with the graveyard. But I feel like you have to main it or at least side deck it in some capacity because it's just way too good going second. There's so many matchups where you just activate it and then instantly win. And of course, if you are still playing against like Tearlament, you're going to keep it in regardless of going first or second. But it really is a card in here mainly for going second, and a lot of the times when you draw it going first, it's not actually that good. So just watch out for that. This is more of a Dweller deck than a Shifter deck. It's just going to play Shifter anyway because the card is so good in certain matchups. Next up, we of course have 3 copies of Exosister packs. This card is crazy. It's a Rhoda, it's an extender, it's a card you can set as an interruption if you don't forget that you don't have Vadis targets. It's just a really good spell card, and yeah, definitely a 3 of. We have 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. It digs towards every good card in your deck, and it's one of the ways you can get away with a lower monster count. I am wondering if they're going to hit this card. Wouldn't be surprised to see it like semi or limited in the future. Next up, we have 3 copies of the card from what, 10-15 years ago, Forbidden Lance. If it was good enough for Dino Rabbit, it's good enough for me. You can use it to protect yourself from the Book of Moon type cards and or tactics on your Magnifica, which is a huge problem for this strategy. You can also even use it against Infinite Impermanence when you go first, which is a way to stop your combo when you normal summon Aratama, so I love more ways to play through hand traps. But even then going second, it has a lot of applications as well. Against Pearly, for example, which is one of this deck's weaker matchups when you're going second, if you draw the Forbidden Lance, you can use it when they activate the trap card to prevent them from ranking up, which is a really big deal. You can also use this against like Vanquish Soul. Their Book of Moon spell is like a real problem for this deck because Book of Moon cards are pretty good against Exosisters. And if you lance the Vanquish Soul that they target, it won't change positions, and then they won't Book of Moon anything. There's just a lot of random applications like that throughout the tournament that came up over and over again. You know, if your opponent tries to fuse with their monsters, you can chain Lance and make it so they can't fuse with it. It's just a really versatile card, and in a deck like this that ends on one monster that is very fragile, you really want to make sure you have some protection for it. So having Lance is really helpful. I also did decide to play one copy of Call by the Grave in the main deck here. I know that not everyone loves this card right now, but you really don't want your Martha to get ashed, so Call by the Grave is in here almost exclusively for that. But it is a good card just in general. Outside of that, for example, I was able to like call by a Pearly that was in Grave when he had a Pearly on board. That was kind of funny. I did main deck a small Triple Tactics Thrust engine, so I do play 2 copies of Thrust in the main, 1 Talent, 1 Herald, and 1 copy of Duster got added for YCS Richmond because Rescue Ace is crazy and this card's really good against that. These cards are not necessarily like required to play Exosisters. I think this deck certainly can be built on a budget, but I will say that Thrust is obviously strong. I don't really need to explain that too much like in general, but in this deck specifically, being able to set either Returnia or Vadis when your opponent hand traps you is a big deal, because in this deck, if you end on like just Vadis face down, a lot of the times that is actually enough, because if your opponent does anything that touches the graveyard, you can get 2 Xyz monsters on the board immediately. So that's just what Thrust gets you to. If you get hand trapped at any point, being able to guarantee that you can set Vadis or Returnia is really big. So I like this card a lot. And then obviously going second, I mean, you have all these great options. Like I said, Pearly's a rough matchup, so Herald is like pretty good in that. And then obviously Duster's big as well. Talent is a card that you can draw going first or second. And I think I lost most of the die rolls at Richmond, so I really appreciated having these going second cards in the deck. Finally, for the trap cards, we have 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, obviously just one of the best hand traps in the format right now. And then we have 1 each of Exosister Vadis and Exosister Returnia. I don't think you need to play more than 1 each of these cards. I really wanted to minimize the bad draws going second. That's why I cut Irene. That's why I cut the second Returnia. I just don't think that this deck can afford to draw bad when going second. You need every card to be live, and especially with the Thrust in there, you have access to those trap cards. This is the main deck. It was 40 cards. I was very, very happy with it. Like I said, the only real change is that I didn't play Sophia at Indy, but I think that was a mistake. I played the Magistus card instead. I think those are pretty cool, but the extra deck space was really tight with all of the new cards that just came out, so that was actually kind of tough, so we didn't play that at Richmond. I played 3 copies of Machias, that's like the best one, 2 copies of Caspitel. You almost always just get rid of this card with Prosperity, like the second copy that is, because we really don't have that many monsters in the main deck to search, but you know, it's in there. Sometimes the second one comes up, and honestly, in this format, the non-special summoning from graveyard effect can be pretty relevant, you know, if you play against like the Horus cards, for example. And yeah, you can really kind of steal some games with that effect, where in the past I feel like it was almost always just like useless. We have 1 copy of the Dweller Exosister, 1 copy of the card that wins the game, 2 copies of Magnifica. It is just such a versatile monster. The non-targeting banish, the tag out, the double attack, it just gives you like so much that you can do with this deck. I just love it so much. And yeah, I really like the Exosister deck because it feels very versatile. I love toolbox decks. And while these cards are very powerful, you also have to keep in mind that when you're playing this deck, most of your opponents have no clue what you're doing. Like, they're reading every card for the first time. Maybe they know what Martha does, maybe they've seen Magnifica on an end board, but most of my opponents had to read all of my cards. And when you're in a spot like that, your extra deck monsters get so much more value because, like, I'm summoning Machiases into boards that it immediately breaks. They just don't realize that they're playing into it, and that is an advantage of playing rogue decks. That's why I like playing decks like this. Anyway, moving on, we have 1 Evil Swarm Exton Knight for going into back row. I don't think this card is necessary. I couldn't think of a 15th monster, but I feel like I keep putting this in and I've never summoned it. Against backrow decks, Zeus is usually just easier to get to and better anyway, so I'm not really sure, but it is in there. We have Baguska, which oftentimes is being summoned specifically to go into the Zeus. Artama, add Sakitama, normal Sakitama, make Baguska is like almost game into any board when you make the Zeus. We also have, of course, Sky Crisis. This card is really powerful. It is only been out for a couple weeks here, but like I said, normal summon Aratama. People don't think it's threatening, just summon Typhon, and that's really good. Yeah, very, very powerful card. And then finally, I hate to say it, and no, this is not necessary. You don't have to play these cards. You don't have to buy these cards, especially for Exosisters. I did play Almirage and SP Little Knight. I will say it is good in this deck, but not like overpowered. Remember that the Martha locks you into only special summoning Exosister monsters for the rest of the turn. So if you do that, you're never summoning these cards, and you're not really summoning a lot of the extra deck monsters besides Exosisters for that reason. However, this card is incredibly good if, for example, your hand is like just Aratama or whatever, and you go Aratama, normal Sakitama, and then they flip a D barrier against you. What do you do now? Well, you can just, I mean, I did this multiple times. You can just Almirage and then make SP. Another situation is when you start your turn with just a Machias on the field. That does happen quite a bit because a lot of times the Magnifica is tagging into that. If you only have like one other monster and like the search gets stopped by Ash or Imperm, so you can't get the packs to get the Martha, it's really good to just normal summon a monster and then immediately go into SP Little Knight, banish a card. You know, you can't attack, but it is what it is. And then on their turn, you have an interruption. So in that way, if your opponent like hand traps you at that point when you only have that Machias search to get you somewhere, having the SP Little Knight in your extra deck is a really good fallback option. But please note, you do not have to play Little Knight, you do not have to play Thrust. Don't let expensive cards in this deck stop you from playing Exosisters. The deck is very budget friendly as far as I know. I mean, all the cards just got reprinted, so you can definitely play the Exosister cards without playing these like really expensive unnecessary extra cards. Anyway, for the side deck, to round things out, we have 3 copies of Drone Lockbird. This deck can really easily OTK, so I'm just making your opponent pass the turn is really good. Keep in mind, if you do draw this card alongside Shifter, that you can use both. You just have to wait for a search, and then you go Chainlink 1 Shifter, Chainlink 2 Droll. I don't think that's that crazy, but just in case you didn't know, now you do. Next up for board breakers, and then keep in mind these cards are searchable by the Thrust, of course. We have 2 copies of Lightning Storm, 1 copy of Change of Heart, and 2 copies of Evenly Matched. I don't know if Change of Heart is the right card for this deck. I think in hindsight, I would include a second copy of Tactics instead of the Change of Heart. That might be like the only change that I didn't like from this deck list, but it is what it is. These are really good board breakers, and yeah, you just want to draw them going second. We are playing 1 single copy of the Exosister Prohibition. It's good when you go first for stopping Nibiru and sometimes stopping other hand traps, but it can also be good for other stuff. You know, hitting like Branded Fusion against Branded is pretty funny, and you can just call like the most important card in your opponent's deck after you've used it to prevent the Nibiru from happening, just because it calls a card on your turn and then it can call a card on the opponent's turn as well. Not to mention that the back row popping effect is like people always forget about it. It's a hidden effect, right? Like I always give them the card to read, but just having this as a searchable out to Floodgates and Nibiru is pretty good. 3 copies of Judgment and 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. Yeah, the Anti-Spell specifically is really powerful in this deck. Your main combo ends on 4 banishes, so if your opponent sets a bunch of back row that were spell cards, you take them all out before they ever have a chance to activate them. We do have some tricks up our sleeve, and OTKing is one of those, so you want these cards to hopefully just see another turn and get you there. Anyway, that is all for today's video. It has been a while since I've done a deck profile, but time just gets away from me, and yeah, I wanted to do this one because I love Exosisters, and I haven't made an in-depth profile for the deck in like the year I've been playing it, but I had a lot of fun at Richmond and Indy, and I think that this is one of my favorite deck lists for Exosisters yet that I've built, so I really want to share with you guys today, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll try to answer them because we're talking Exosisters, and I could always talk Exosisters. I'll see you later. Goodbye.